Chapter 1. The diesel engine of the school bus purred softly in the sleepy town of Red Haven, Oregon, a town flanked by thick pine forests and sloped hills that bled orange in the late autumn sun. It was the sort of town where time moved a little slower, where people waved at each other, even if they didn't know each other's names, and where the falling of a single yellow leaf could feel like a minor event. It was 4:06 p.m. Edmund Dale, age 59, leaned forward in his driver's seat and adjusted the rearview mirror with a familiar flick of his wrist. A former forest ranger who had traded long hikes and emergency rescues for quiet routes and predictable afternoons, he found peace in the rhythm of driving children home. But that peace had been thinning lately. His eyes scanned the mirror, settling again on the second seat from the front, right side. There she was, as she had been for the past 5 days, small, silent, shoulders hunched forward beneath a navy blue hoodie, hands clasped tight in her lap. Her name, written in neatly printed letters on the attendance sheet, was Mae Wexley, age 13, recently transferred from the next county over. He'd learned that much on her first day, when she had boarded the bus with a counselor escorting her, saying something about a temporary guardianship arrangement and a family transition. Edmund didn't ask questions. He rarely did. But now, 5 days into her routine, it was getting harder not to wonder. Mae never spoke to the other kids. Not once. Not even when they tried. She didn't eat anything on the ride. And every day, at nearly the same time, right after the last few kids were dropped off and the front of the bus went quiet, he noticed her wipe her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. Not loud sobs. No sniffling or attention-drawing sniffles. Just silent tears. Like she didn't want anyone to know she was crying. Edmund's gaze drifted back to the road. It curved ahead gently along the edge of Maple Hollow Preserve, and the late sun filtered through the high branches like golden syrup. His fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel. Today, something felt different. Sharper, like a hum beneath the surface. Cherry Bend, Edmund called out as they approached the next stop. 2 girls stood from the back and shuffled forward, giggling about a TikTok video they'd seen earlier. They thanked him like they always did. He offered them a warm, silent nod. And then there were 5. 5 kids left. And Mae was one of them. From the mirror, he noticed her glancing sideways, her body subtly angling toward the window. As the others chattered and joked in the back, she sat perfectly still, hands disappearing beneath her seat for a brief moment. A soft clink sounded, metal against metal. Edmund's brow furrowed. "Mae, you all right back there?" His voice, though soft, carried easily in the mostly empty bus. The girl's head snapped up like she'd been caught doing something forbidden. "Yes. Sorry," she mumbled. "Dropped my coin." He said nothing for a moment, then nodded. "All right." The conversation ended there. But something inside him didn't quite settle. The last of the other kids filtered off at the corner of Redwood and Hartley, chattering about science homework and soccer practice. And then it was just Mae and the quiet engine hum again. He let the silence stretch a bit. "Nice weather today," he offered finally, as the bus made its way down the empty stretch of Winslow Road. Mae gave a slight shrug. He tried again. "Do you like Red Haven so far?" "Settling in okay." Another pause. Then a quiet. "It's okay. Not much to work with." They turned onto Willow Path Drive. The houses here were spread farther apart, some nearly hidden behind brush and fence. Mae's stop was the last, just before the end of the route. It sat at the top of a gravel drive, beside a dilapidated white house with boarded side windows and an overgrown front yard. It looked like it hadn't been painted since the late 90s. As the bus rolled to a gentle stop, Edmund watched Mae slowly gather her things. Her backpack looked heavier than a 7th grader's ought to be. She didn't meet his eyes as she passed. "Take care, Mae," he said softly. She paused for a fraction of a second. "You too." And then she stepped off. The door hissed shut behind her. He waited, as always, until she made it to the porch, watching her silhouette shrink against the fading light. But tonight, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The porch light was off. There was no movement inside the house. No welcoming figure at the door. Mae stood there for a beat too long, her fingers twitching slightly at her sides. Then she turned, glanced toward the woods behind the property, and disappeared into the house. Edmund exhaled. But instead of shifting the bus into gear, he sat there. Still. listening to the hum of the engine, listening to the whisper of something unsettled. His eyes returned to the second seat, where May had been, and something caught his attention, a faint glimmer. He stood. His boots thudded softly as he walked the aisle, his hands trailing lightly over the tops of each seat. When he reached May's, he crouched slowly, knees popping with age. There was a tiny metallic loop hanging just beneath the seat. A zipper pull? No, not quite. He reached underneath and felt something smooth and cold, wedged tight between the seat cushion and the back rail. He pulled it out. It was a small tin, round, the kind you might use for mints or sewing needles. But this one was sealed with clear tape, wrapped meticulously across the edge. He turned it over. Faded letters were scribbled in permanent marker. Do not open here. The air around Edmund felt colder somehow. He held the tin for a long moment, unsure what to think. Then, with the care of someone handling a secret too heavy to ignore, he slipped it into his coat pocket. And for the first time in weeks, he decided he wasn't going straight home. He was going to take a detour. Something was off. And Edmund Dale had never been the kind of man to pretend he hadn't noticed. Chapter 2. The gravel crunched under the tires of Edmund's rust-colored Tacoma as he turned off the main road and onto a winding trail that led to the town's tiny library. A thin mist had begun to settle over Red Haven, turning the pine trees into looming silhouettes. The street lamps flickered lazily, as if waking from sleep too soon. He parked beside the building, a squat red brick structure with a crooked flagpole out front and a closed sign swinging gently in the window. But that wasn't a problem. Edmund wasn't here to check out books. He was here for Clara. Inside, the library smelled faintly of dust and warm wood polish. Edmund knocked on the glass side door. A second later, a soft face appeared behind the curtain, lined with years of reading glasses and quiet wisdom. Clara Simmons, head librarian and unofficial keeper of town secrets, opened the door with a raised brow. Edmund Dale, she murmured with mock surprise, adjusting the knit shawl around her shoulders. If you've come to finally return a field guide to birdsong, you're 8 years late. I liked the ending, he replied with a faint smile. She stepped aside, allowing him in. The warmth was immediate, the radiators humming like old friends in the corners. What's got you out after sundown? She asked, leading him past darkened stacks and into her back office, which smelled of cinnamon tea and old newspapers. Edmund pulled the small tin from his coat pocket and placed it carefully on her desk. Clara studied it for a long moment. Do not open here, she read aloud, then glanced up. Cryptic. He nodded. Found it under a seat on the bus. Belongs to a girl named May Wexley. Quiet type. New to town. Been crying every day this week after school. Today she dropped something metal and lied about it. After I dropped her off, I found that. Clara's face changed subtly, her mouth drawing into a straighter line, her gaze sharpening beneath her wireframe glasses. She was not a woman easily rattled, but she was a woman who understood when something felt off. You opened it? She asked. He shook his head. Didn't feel right. Thought maybe you'd know how to do it, safely. She gave a small nod, then opened her bottom drawer and pulled out a letter opener, thin, smooth, and brass-handled. Her hands moved carefully, slicing the clear tape and easing the lid off with the precision of a museum curator. A soft click sounded as the lid popped. Inside was a roll of paper, tightly wound, bound with a pale blue hair tie. Edmund watched as Clara slowly unrolled it on her desk. Silence fell. The paper was childlike, lined notebook paper, creased from folding. The words were written in small, blocky handwriting with a pencil that had pressed hard, leaving grooves in the paper. But the content. Clara's eyes skimmed quickly, then again slower. She looked up at Edmund. You need to read this, she said softly. He leaned forward and began to scan. This is not my home. This is not my real house. My mom left me here, and she doesn't answer when I write. He says she's gone, but I don't believe him. There's a basement I'm not allowed in. It has a red door with a lock. I think that's where my letters go. He says the crows carry them, but crows can't read. He laughs like he knows I know. Edmund felt his stomach twist. There was more. There's a noise at night. I think someone else is down there. I hear tapping sometimes, and breathing. But when I ask him, he gets quiet, then loud. Then he says if I open the door, I'll never come back out. The final lines were barely legible, smudged and rushed. If someone finds this, I'm real. I'm real, and I want to go home. Please don't tell him I'm asking for help. He watches everything, even when the lights are off. The room seemed colder now, despite the radiators hissing gently behind them. Edmund stood slowly, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. She never said a word, he murmured. Clara folded her arms tightly. Some kids don't, she replied. They think the silence is the only thing keeping them safe. They sat in silence for a few heartbeats. The library walls, lined with silent books, seemed to listen with them. Edmund's voice was quiet when he finally asked, "Do we know anything about the man she lives with?" "Wexley." Clara's brows furrowed. "I know a Marius Wexley. Retired, mid-60s. Lives on Willow Path." "That the place?" Edmund nodded. He was a security contractor. Left town for years, came back 2 summers ago. Told the neighbors he'd taken in his cousin's daughter after the cousin passed in a car accident. She leaned back in her chair. People said he kept to himself. Always polite. But you know how this town works. People see what they want, and ignore what they don't. Edmund looked down at the note again. The handwriting, the desperation in those final lines. Something about it gnawed at his chest like a dull blade. He spoke slowly. "There's something else," she said on the bus. "When I asked what she dropped, she said it was a coin." Clara looked at him. And there was no coin under the seat. The silence between them stretched long. Outside, the last daylight drained from the sky. The mist was thicker now, clinging to the library windows like ghostly breath. Clara tapped the tin's lid with a slow, rhythmic finger. "Whatever's going on," she said softly, "that girl is scared. And she doesn't trust the people around her." Edmund nodded. "Except maybe her bus driver." Clara stood. "So what now?" Edmund picked up the note, rolled it again carefully, and placed it back in the tin. "Now," he said quietly, "I find out what's behind the red door." Chapter 3. The fog hung low over Red Haven the next morning, clinging to rooftops like a shroud. The sky was a dull slate gray, and the sun made no promises of appearance. It was the kind of morning that made clocks tick louder and coffee taste weaker. Edmund Dale stood in front of his bathroom mirror, his shaving razor resting untouched in the sink. He was still dressed in his nightclothes, his thoughts thick with unrest. The image of that crumpled note floated behind his eyes. The words, "If someone finds this, I'm real," repeating like a heartbeat. He finally ran cold water over his face and looked at his own reflection. Wrinkled, weary, and too old to be crawling through shadows, but not too old to know when something wasn't right. By 7:22 a.m., he had stepped into his uniform, a pressed navy windbreaker with the Red Haven School District patch sewn neatly above the chest pocket. His boots were tied tightly, and in his left coat pocket, tucked beside his notepad and reading glasses, sat the small tin. He drove the bus in silence that morning. The usual sounds of the route played out. Kids bickering about phone chargers, a boy trying to smuggle a ferret again in his backpack, a group of cheerleaders practicing a chant too loudly. But Edmund heard none of it. His eyes flicked to the mirror every time he rounded a bend, waiting for the girl with the navy hoodie. May boarded last, as always. Her hood was up, though it wasn't raining. Her backpack sagged under its weight. She didn't make eye contact as she walked past him. "Morning, May," he said quietly. She didn't respond. As the bus rumbled on, the kids slowly filtered into their daydreams and earbuds. Edmund's attention returned to the mirror. May sat in her usual spot, second seat on the right, eyes fixed on the window as trees slid past like ghosts. He studied her posture, the way she leaned slightly toward the seatback like she was making herself smaller. She didn't cry this morning. That almost bothered him more. They arrived at Red Haven Middle just before the second bell. The kids piled out, laughing and stretching. May was the last again. She hesitated at the top step. "May," Edmund said gently. She stopped. He lowered his voice. "You ever get scared at home?" She turned slightly, just enough that he could see part of her face beneath the hood. Her eyes were a deep, pale green. Tired, watchful. She didn't answer, but her fingers curled tighter around her backpack strap. Then she stepped off the bus and vanished into the morning fog. Edmund stayed parked longer than usual. His eyes lingered on the glass doors of the school, half expecting her to turn back and say something. She didn't. Instead, he drove, but not back to the depot. He followed the outer edge of Red Haven, past the diner and the shuttered post office, past the gas station with the broken E in its sign, and turned onto Willow Path Drive. It was quiet here, the houses far apart, fences leaning like tired old men. The Wexley home stood near the very end, a sagging white structure with warped shutters and a mailbox that hadn't seen a letter in weeks. He parked 2 houses down and shut off the engine. The windows of the house were dark. A long, sloping path of cracked concrete led up to the porch. The front steps were overgrown with weeds, and the screen door hung crooked from one hinge. From here, the house looked wrong, like it hadn't just aged, but curled inward. He didn't get out right away. Instead, he sat still and watched. A bird landed on the power line above the house. It let out a low croak. A crow. Edmund's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He waited another 10 minutes. No movement. No car in the drive. No sound of a television, a radio, or even a barking dog. The silence was too whole. Finally, he stepped out. He walked slowly, deliberate steps. Every footfall against the gravel felt louder than it should. As he approached the porch, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. He had written a single sentence on the paper inside. "This girl is not safe." He slipped the note into the screen door's frame. If nothing else, it might make someone ask questions. He had no legal authority and no proof of anything, just a gut and an old tin filled with worry. But as he turned to leave, something caught his attention. A sound, faint, barely more than a breath. But it was there. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence again. He turned slowly, his ears straining. The sound hadn't come from the porch. It had come from the side of the house, near the ground. He moved carefully, circling the side of the building. And there, just barely visible through the thicket of ivy and brush, was a door. Half buried, low to the ground, painted red. There was a padlock on it, rusted but intact. He stood there for a long time, the back of his neck prickling in the cool air. The crow cawed again from the wire above, as if warning him. He knelt and placed his ear against the door. Nothing. Then, 1 tap. Then 2 more. Edmund staggered back. Something was inside. Chapter 4. The red door sat half-sunken beneath layers of ivy and thyme, its surface blistered from years of weather, paint flaking away like peeling skin. Edmund stared at it, unmoving. The sound, 3 taps, deliberate and patient, lingered in the cold morning air like an echo. He felt the weight of the tin in his coat pocket again, pressing into his ribs. "Someone's in there," he whispered, more to himself than to the trees around him. The wind responded with a faint stir of leaves, as if shifting uncomfortably. For a long moment, he simply stood there, eyes locked on the rusted padlock that clung to the latch like a clenched fist. It didn't look strong. In fact, the loop of the shackle was already slightly cracked, corrosion having eaten into its edge. But he didn't dare try it, not yet. Not without knowing what he'd be opening. Instead, he stepped back, his boots crunching in the leaf litter, and pulled out his phone. No bars. Of course. The thick woods behind the property always had poor reception. He considered walking down the road. But then what? What would he tell the police? That he heard a noise behind a locked door, and a sad-eyed girl left a cryptic note in a candy tin? He turned and walked quietly back toward his truck. Each footstep felt louder than the last. Before climbing in, he took one more look at the house, its empty windows like staring eyes. The roof sagged slightly near the chimney, and an old satellite dish hung by a single bolt. Not a place of comfort. Not a place for a child. He made a decision. Before returning to his afternoon route, he stopped at Red Haven General Supply. The bell above the door gave a sharp ding as he entered. He made a quiet circuit around the aisles, collecting items without drawing attention. A small flashlight, a pry bar, a canister of industrial oil, a coil of nylon rope. At the counter, the young clerk rang him up in silence. "Early home repairs?" she asked, gesturing to the pry bar. "Just getting ahead of winter," Edmund replied with a faint smile. "Some things don't fix themselves." He paid in cash. That afternoon, as the children piled onto the bus and filled the air with their usual end-of-day chaos, Edmund kept one eye on the mirror. When May boarded, she didn't speak, didn't look at him. She sat in her usual spot. But she didn't cry. She looked numb. As the bus rumbled through the neighborhoods and the children thinned out, Edmund's worry only deepened. When there were only 2 students left, he saw May slip something from her backpack and quietly wedge it under the seat again. He didn't say anything. Not yet. When the final student disembarked and May was alone, she turned her face slightly toward the window, her reflection pale in the glass. And as they approached her stop, Edmund tried once more. "May," he said gently. "You know, I used to be a forest ranger." She didn't answer. Spent years learning how to track wildlife. Could tell a bear's direction just by the bend of a twig or the way a footprint filled with water. Still silence. "You know what I learned after all that time?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Even animals know when something's wrong in a place. They won't go near it. They trust their instincts." May looked at him then, just briefly, and in her eyes he saw it. Fear. Not of him, not of school, but of going home. The bus stopped in front of the White House. The porch light remained off. No figure stood in the doorway. May gathered her bag slowly. She hesitated in the aisle. Then, quietly, without looking back, she said, "He doesn't go down there anymore. But someone else does." And then she was gone. Edmund sat frozen. Her words curled around his spine like frost. He didn't drive away immediately. He watched her walk up the steps, unlock the door, and slip inside. No one met her. No voice called her name. The house remained still. That night, after the last run, and after turning in the keys, Edmund sat in his truck in the depot parking lot, the tin now resting in the passenger seat. He opened it again, reread the note. "I hear tapping sometimes. And breathing. Don't tell him." He knew then he couldn't wait any longer. Whatever was behind that door, whatever May had heard, wasn't just loneliness or imagination. Someone was in that basement. And Edmund Dale had never looked away from something that needed saving. Chapter 5. The town of Redhaven slept restlessly that night. A light drizzle had begun sometime around midnight, coating the narrow streets with a silvery sheen. Tree branches tapped softly against windows across the neighborhood, and the wind carried whispers through the gutters, barely heard but always there. The world outside seemed to murmur secrets, and inside Edmund's cabin, sleep refused to come. He sat in his armchair, a thick wool blanket wrapped around his knees, a mug of untouched tea cooling on the side table. The fire had burned low. Shadows moved lazily along the floorboards. The tin sat open on the coffee table before him. The note lay beside it. He read it again, every line, every pencil-gouged word, and then, quietly, deliberately, he folded it back up and slid it into his jacket pocket. The jacket was already zipped. His boots were already tied. His keys waited on the hook. He rose slowly, not because of his age, but because of the weight he now carried. It had nothing to do with the tools in the back of his truck. It was the weight of knowing. The roads were empty as he drove, street lamps casting long, watery reflections on the pavement. He kept the radio off. Even the softest music felt intrusive. When he turned onto Willow Path Drive, he killed the headlights. The Wexley house stood in silence, just as before. No lights, no movement, just that tired porch and its unblinking windows. The crow was gone now, but somehow Edmund felt like it was still watching. He parked a full block away this time, walked the last stretch under the cover of trees. His boots made little sound on the damp grass. The red door waited, partially hidden behind a collapsed section of fence and a tangle of wild brambles. The lock hadn't changed. Rusted, fragile, stubborn. He crouched beside it and pulled the flashlight from his coat. A quick flick of the switch, only once, to examine the edges. The frame was old, weathered wood. The hinges were worn and groaned even from the touch. From his pocket, he pulled out the oil canister and carefully dribbled a line across the lock's mechanism. Then he waited. Let the silence settle again. Let the rain patter on the leaves above him. And finally, he took out the small pry bar. With a sharp, practiced twist, the lock snapped. It didn't fall dramatically. It simply gave up with a reluctant click, like a whispered confession. He eased the door open. It groaned softly, enough to make his breath catch. Beyond the door, a narrow set of wooden steps descended into blackness. No light, no sound. The air that rose up from the basement was still, damp, Not foul exactly, just wrong. Like the smell of a room no one was supposed to enter. He pulled a kerchief from his back pocket and tied it around his nose and mouth, then clicked on the flashlight again, keeping the beam low, cautious. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, not to trap himself, but to muffle the world. 1 step. 2. The stairs creaked under his weight. 3. 4. Each footfall was a question he couldn't unask. Halfway down, the light caught on something, a shape on the floor. He froze, adjusted the beam. It was a box. No, not just one, several. Cardboard, labeled with names. Marissa, 1996. Emily, 2003. Casey, 2011. Some had faded photos taped to the lids. Girls, smiling. School portraits. One had a hospital bracelet tucked under the twine. Edmund felt his throat tighten. He moved the flashlight slowly across the room. The space was wider than expected. Wooden beams above. A concrete floor. Shelves along the far wall stacked with files, notebooks, and tapes. But it was the far corner that held his gaze. There was a mattress on the floor. Thin, threadbare. No sheets. Beside it, a bucket. A tray with a plastic cup. An old stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. And in the mattress's shadow, someone stirred. Edmund froze. His breath caught, heart pounding. The shape moved slightly, then sat up. It was a girl. Thin, pale, eyes wide with fear. She didn't scream. She just stared, blinking in the sudden light like a creature that hadn't seen it in years. Edmund slowly lowered the flashlight beam away from her face. "It's all right," he whispered, voice low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't speak. "I'm here because May wrote a note," he added. "She left it on the bus. I read it." Still no words. But something in her posture changed, a shift from fear to curiosity. Edmund took a step closer. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl blinked again. Then finally, her voice emerged, hoarse and dry. "Claire." He crouched slowly, keeping a respectful distance. "How long have you been here, Claire?" She shook her head. "Don't know." "Do you know who brought you here?" Her eyes flinched. "Man older. Always called me new sister. Said I wasn't ready for the outside yet." Edmund's breath caught. This wasn't just about May. This was something worse. Something bigger. Something that had happened before. Many times. He looked toward the stairs, then back at her. "Claire, do you think you can stand?" She hesitated, then nodded faintly. Edmund stepped forward, offering his hand. And for the first time, she reached back. Her fingers were like twigs. Together, they climbed the steps slowly, her legs trembling with effort. When they reached the red door, he opened it gently and let the cool night air rush in. Claire winced at it, but didn't retreat. Outside, he helped her to the cover of trees, wrapped her in his jacket. Then he made the call. This time, he didn't hesitate. "This is Edmund Dale. I need police and child services on Willow Path Drive. I found a missing girl, and I believe there may be others." The dispatcher's voice responded, calm but firm. "Help is on the way." As he watched Claire lean her head against the bark of a tree and breathe in the night air, Edmund felt the weight of years settle on his shoulders. But in the space where fear had sat all evening, something else stirred. Resolve. Chapter 6. The flashing lights came quietly. Red and blue patterns spilled over the trees as 2 cruisers crept down Willow Path Drive, their sirens silenced out of respect for the dark. A second later, an unmarked SUV pulled in behind them, and from the passenger seat stepped a woman in a gray coat with a lanyard around her neck and tired eyes that had seen too much. Edmund stayed by the tree line, keeping his arm around Claire. She trembled beneath his jacket, her eyes darting toward the approaching cars, uncertain whether these were rescuers or more shadows to fear. "It's okay," he murmured. "They're here to help." The first officer stepped out, tall, heavy-set, flashlight in hand. His face stiffened with quiet alertness as he approached. "You're the one who called?" he asked. Edmund nodded. She was locked inside a basement, padlocked from the outside. The officer's brows drew together. How long was she in there? Edmund looked at Claire. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. He answered for her. "She says she doesn't know. Long enough to forget how the sky feels." Another officer joined them, followed by the woman in the gray coat. She knelt slowly in front of Claire, her voice soft. "I'm Miss Sandwell. I work with Child Services. You're safe now, sweetheart." Claire stared at her for a moment before nodding, once. Miss Sandwell offered her a silver emergency blanket and gently coaxed her toward the back seat of the SUV, where a thermos and a soft blanket waited. The girl never looked back. Edmund remained under the tree, watching as the officers followed his path to the red door. One of them took photos. Another called something in on the radio. The lock, broken and rusted, lay on the ground like a dropped tooth. One officer crouched beside the door and peered in. "God," he muttered. "It's worse than I thought." Edmund didn't ask what he saw. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. 20 minutes passed in quiet procession. Officers moving in pairs, taking notes, asking soft questions. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. But then, movement from the street. Headlights. A silver sedan crept into the driveway of the Wexley house, tires crackling over gravel. The engine turned off, but the headlights stayed on. A moment later, the driver's door opened. Out stepped a man. Tall, lean, dressed in a dark brown sweater with a collar. His hair was gray at the temples, combed neatly. A calm expression on his face. Too calm. He didn't blink at the police cars. He didn't flinch at the open red door. He simply adjusted his sleeves and began walking toward the porch, as if nothing at all were out of place. One officer stepped in front of him. "Sir, I need you to stop right there." The man raised a brow. "I live here." "Name?" "Marius Wexley." The officer's jaw tightened. "And your relationship to the minor child who resides here?" "She's my niece," Marius replied evenly. "Her mother died. I have guardianship." Miss Sandwell stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Wexley," she said, her tone unreadable, "we have removed a minor from your basement. She has no memory of how long she's been held there, and she claims you referred to her as new sister." Marius didn't react. Not a twitch. Not a breath. He simply said, "That's absurd." One of the officers moved closer. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning." And finally, just for a heartbeat, something flickered behind Marius Wexley's eyes. Not fear. Not guilt. Annoyance. He exhaled once. "Do what you need to do," he said, raising his hands. They cuffed him gently. No struggle. No protests. Just quiet compliance. But as they led him toward the cruiser, his eyes found Edmund. They locked. There was no anger in that stare. No fear. Just something ancient. Something cold. And then he was gone, tucked into the back of a police car, the door closing with a soft, final click. Edmund remained outside, watching the house. After a while, Officer Brenner, stocky, sharp-eyed, came to stand beside him. "You were the one who opened the door," he said. "Yes. You did the right thing." Edmund didn't answer. Officer Brenner continued. "We'll be getting warrants to search the rest of the house. That basement wasn't empty. There's documentation. Old files. Photos. Some we think are decades old." He paused. "There may be other girls. Some are long gone." Edmund's throat tightened. He nodded once. "Did you know him?" the officer asked. "Wexley. Only as a name on a mailbox." Officer Brenner folded his arms. "A lot of quiet monsters in this world. People who know when to smile and keep the lawn cut. Folks see that and don't look closer." Edmund glanced at him. "I drove a bus for 20 years before this. I've learned something." "What's that?" "You can tell everything you need to know about a person," he said, "by how a child looks when they hear their name." The officer nodded slowly. The sun had begun to rise behind the pines. The first light of dawn crept over the roof of the house, casting long shadows across the lawn. The red door now hung open like a wound. The ivy clung to it still, as if trying to hide what it could. Miss Sandwell returned with her coat, now speckled with dew. She looked tired but calm. "She's safe," she said. "Claire. She's being taken to a medical center for observation and care. We've filed her as a recovered minor, missing for nearly 6 months out of Ashbrook County. No one ever tied her to Red Haven." Edmund exhaled. "She asked for you," Miss Sandwell added. He blinked. "Me?" "Yes. Just before the car left. Said to thank you." He didn't answer. The wind stirred again, brushing through the trees like a sigh. Then Miss Sandwell asked softly, "How did you know?" that she was there. Edmund looked at the red door, then back to the quiet street. The sun crept higher. The crows were beginning to return to the wires. "I didn't know," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out the tin, held it in both hands. She told me. Chapter 7. Red Haven had never felt quieter. The morning passed in a hush. Word spread slowly, carefully, through whispered conversations at the diner, the grocery store, the school front office. Most folks didn't know the details, only that police had taken someone away from the old white house at the end of Willow Path. Some said it was drugs. Others said tax fraud. But the ones who had seen the girl, thin, pale, bundled in an oversized school bus driver's coat, they knew something worse had happened. They didn't say it out loud, because in towns like Red Haven, darkness was swallowed with a long sip of coffee and a nod that said, "We don't talk about that here." Edmund returned home around 10 a.m. The fire had long since died in the hearth. His tea sat cold on the side table. He stood in his living room for a long time, coat still on, hands still wrapped around the now empty tin. On the coffee table sat a school roster. He flipped through it slowly, fingers tracing names he'd called out every day for months. Behind each one was a life he only glimpsed for a few minutes in the morning and afternoon. A life filled with parents and cousins and video games and secrets. He'd never noticed how fragile those names felt until now. How temporary. May Wexley. He circled the name with a pencil. The school hadn't heard from her that morning. Not that anyone noticed. Quiet kids often went unnoticed when they vanished for a day. Or two. Or longer. But Edmund noticed. By noon, he was back at the school, standing awkwardly at the front desk as the receptionist, Miss Barlow, tapped at her keyboard with the speed of a distracted pigeon. "Has May been withdrawn from school?" he asked. Miss Barlow blinked. "May who?" "Wexley. May Wexley." Her fingers slowed. "Oh, yeah, she scrolled through a screen. "Looks like there was a file update this morning. Guardianship revoked. Emergency custody noted. Child Services took over. Her case was flagged, but they didn't give details. Standard protocol. Where is she now?" She frowned. "That's confidential, Mr. Dale." "I'm sorry." He nodded, though he already knew that would be the answer. He wasn't family. He wasn't even a teacher. He was just the man who sat behind the wheel of a yellow bus and watched the way kids held themselves when no one else was looking. As he turned to leave, Miss Barlow called out softly, "Wait, there was something." This came in with the rest of the lost and found box. From May's seat, she handed him a small piece of lined paper, folded 3 times. No name on the outside, just faint pencil smudges and the smell of old graphite. He unfolded it. "Thank you. I didn't know anyone would believe me. I thought if I disappeared, it would be like I was never real. But you saw me. I hope Claire gets to see the sky again. I hope I get to forget. And I hope you keep watching. Some of us are still hiding." His fingers trembled slightly as he refolded the note. Outside, the wind picked up again. A soft rustle through the trees that sounded almost like breathing. The sun was sharp on the sidewalk, but Edmund felt none of its warmth. He returned to his truck and sat behind the wheel for a long time. The leather seat creaked as he leaned back, eyes closed. He remembered every second of finding Claire. Every box. Every taped photograph. Every name scrawled on the dusty labels in that basement. Marissa. Emily. Casey. How many towns had their own Willow Path? How many red doors sat unopened? That evening, he returned to the depot. Signed out the keys to bus 6A. The same bus May had ridden. Before his shift, he spent 10 minutes at seat 2, right side. He crouched, flashlight in hand, and looked under the seat again. No tin. No pills. No secret notes. But something glinted faintly. He reached in and pulled it out. A button. Pale pink. From a school cardigan, maybe. It was smooth, plastic, unremarkable. But it had been hidden. Pressed into the seam where only someone frightened or careful would place it. He held it gently in his palm, wondering who had left it. May. Claire. Someone before. How many messages were left for someone to find? Just in case the world decided to care. He placed the button in the glove box. Started the bus. When the kids boarded that afternoon, he greeted them each by name. He looked them all in the eye. Some looked back. Some didn't. But he saw them. Every one. That night, When he parked the bus and completed his checks, he lingered by May's seat again, just for a moment, and then he turned out the lights. But not before he whispered, to no one in particular, "I'm still watching." Chapter 8. The sky over Red Haven hung low and gray again. A week had passed since the night Claire was found. A week of questions, of quietly avoided conversations, of news headlines from out-of-town reporters that didn't linger long. The kind of week where people nodded more than they spoke, and neighbors left casseroles on each other's porches without knocking. But Edmund didn't move on. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. He stood again that morning in front of the old Wexley house, now surrounded by yellow police tape that flapped lazily in the breeze. The porch remained as crooked as ever, the windows still empty. The red door, weather-warped and slightly ajar, had been sealed with a temporary barrier by the local sheriff's office. But nothing could seal what had been done inside. He had been asked to give a statement. Then 2. Then 3. First to Officer Brenner. Then to the county investigator. Then to a woman in a Navy suit who never gave her full name and only referred to federal oversight. They all asked the same questions in different ways. How long had he known something was wrong? Had the girl said anything directly implicating Marius Wexley? Had he ever been inside the house before? And then, what made you decide to open that door? To each of them, Edmund gave the same answer, quietly and without drama. She left a note. But now, as he stood at the curb, arms folded against the late fall wind, he found himself wondering why the others hadn't seen it. The teachers, the neighbors, the guidance counselor who'd signed May's temporary transfer paperwork. Had no one really looked close enough? He turned away from the house and made his way to his truck. Inside, his thermos steamed faintly with chamomile untouched. The radio crackled with static. He had stopped trying to find music days ago. In the passenger seat sat a box. Inside, the pink button. May's first note. A copy of the school roster. And now something new. A photograph. Delivered quietly in a plain envelope to the school's lost and found bin. The secretary said she thought it was just old student paperwork. But Edmund had opened it. The photograph was of a girl. Younger than May. Maybe 10. Dark curls. Big eyes. She was holding a stuffed rabbit. The same rabbit Edmund had seen on the basement floor beside the mattress. Her name was scribbled in black ink on the back. Isabel Wexley, 1992. There was no student file for Isabel at Red Haven. No record in the school archives. But Edmund remembered the boxes in the basement. How some had been dated as far back as the 90s. Had Claire been the first in a long time? Or had she simply been the first to survive? He called Clara Simmons at the library. She answered on the second ring. "I thought you might," she said, before he could even greet her. "Come by. I've been waiting." He arrived 20 minutes later. The library was closed for catalog maintenance, but the lights in Clara's office glowed warmly through the fogged-up window. She had a folder open when he arrived. "No town records for Isabel Wexley," she said before he could sit. "Not in the school yearbooks, not in the birth announcements, not in the census updates from the 90s. But," Clara tapped the edge of a page, "but I found something in the microfiche archives from the Ashbrook Herald, 1993. An obituary. No picture. Just a name." She turned the monitor toward him. Edmund Reed. Isabel K. Wexley, age 10. No cause of death given. Services held privately by the family. Survived by her uncle, Marius Wexley. He stared at it for a long time. She would have been around May's age when she died, Clara added. Maybe a little younger. No other relatives mentioned. No parents. No siblings. Edmund exhaled slowly. "He's been doing this a long time," he whispered. Clara nodded, and learning how to erase them a little more each time. A quiet settled between them. Heavy. Cold. Clara finally broke it. "You're not done, are you?" Edmund shook his head. "I don't think this ends with Claire. Or May. Or even Isabel." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the most recent note. The one May had left in the school's lost and found. He unfolded it slowly. "Some of us are still hiding." Clara closed the folder. "Well," she said softly, "then we'd better start looking." Chapter 9. The first frost came early. Red Haven woke to silver grass and fog that clung low and slow across the earth like breath on glass. Chimneys began to smoke again. The mornings grew quieter. People walked their dogs a little faster. But in the quiet places, like the school bus garage or the library's farthest back room, some still whispered about the Wexley house, about the girl found underground, about the man taken away in silence, and about the one man who wouldn't stop asking questions. Edmund stood beside Clara in the Red Haven Library basement, where the lights flickered every few minutes and the air smelled like time. Before them was a folding table stacked with manila folders, yellowing documents, and decades of dust-covered microfilm reels. 3 days of digging. 3 nights of silence broken only by the turn of pages and the soft scribble of notes. But now, at last, something had surfaced. Clara tapped her pen gently against a photocopied page from a 1988 school attendance log. "Look here," she murmured. "Wexley Marius, custodial guardian of Wexley Julia. Enrolled temporarily. Withdrawn after 3 weeks. Reason, relocation. No forwarding school." Edmund leaned closer. "Julia." Clara nodded. "No yearbook photo. No school ID issued. Barely existed. And this was what? 35 years ago. Almost to the day." Clara pulled another sheet from the growing pile. "And this, an arrest report from Ashbrook County, 1995. Sealed but referenced in a court docket. A missing child case. Circumstantial evidence. Case dropped. No charges filed." "Let me guess," Edmund said quietly. "Marius Wexley was named in the report." Clara nodded, but not as a suspect, as a witness. Edmund rubbed his forehead, weariness pulling at his features. "How many girls?" Clara didn't answer. She didn't have to. The stack on the table had grown too high, too heavy, too grim. "We need to talk to someone," Edmund said. "Not the sheriff, not the local board. Someone who isn't part of Red Haven." Clara hesitated. "I might know someone." She stepped away, walked to the corner cabinet, and opened a drawer Edmund hadn't seen her use before. From it, she pulled out a thin black notebook, edges worn soft by time. "I had a sister," Clara said quietly. "Elaine. We were close. She volunteered with a crisis response unit back in the early 2000s, helped victims of trafficking. She worked with a few federal investigators who took their jobs seriously." Edmund looked at her. "You think she'd help us?" "She's gone," Clara said softly. "Passed in 2014. But one of her old contacts still sends me Christmas cards. I kept her information." She handed him a card. "Agent Lila Devane, Office of Federal Protective Services, Portland Division. She's not FBI," Clara said. "But she listens. And she's quiet." Edmund turned the card over in his hand. "That's good. We don't need loud. We need someone who listens." He made the call the next morning. The line clicked twice before connecting. "This is Devane." Her voice was clear, neutral. The voice of someone who had heard too much and trusted too little. Edmund introduced himself. Then he told her everything. Not just about Claire. Not just about May. But about the file folders. The photographs. The attic Clara had quietly searched and found nothing in, but smelled faintly of old bleach and mold. About the sealed documents. About the names that had been erased, rewritten, and buried. When he finished, there was a long pause on the line. Then Agent Devane spoke. "I've been waiting for someone to say his name again." Edmund's breath caught. "You know Wexley?" "I knew the trail he left," she replied, "and the holes it created. Holes no one wanted to look inside. You've done more already than anyone else in 30 years. Then you'll help." Another pause. "Give me 3 days," she said. "I'll be in Red Haven by Friday. Keep everything. Don't turn it over. Don't speak to press. And don't talk to the sheriff again. Not yet." Edmund agreed. The call ended. He sat in the dark for a long time, watching the fog curl outside his window like smoke from a dying fire. That afternoon, back at the school bus garage, he resumed his route. Kids filed in, as they always did. Some joked. Some stared blankly at their phones. And then, at the last stop, someone new boarded. She was small, freckled, brown curls, maybe 10 years old. She hesitated on the top step, eyes scanning the seats. Edmund smiled gently. "Hey there." She blinked at him. "I'm in Miss Fenner's class. My mom just moved us here from Dunston." "Welcome aboard," Edmund said softly. "Plenty of room." She gave a cautious smile, and took a seat near the middle. And as he shifted the bus into drive and checked his mirrors, Edmund thought of May, of Claire, of Isabel and Julia, and every other name buried under bad paper and dusty silence. And he knew the bus was just a bus, but it was also a shield, and he would keep driving it as long as it meant he could watch the ones no one else watched. Because someone had to. Chapter 10. The first snow came softly. It didn't arrive with blizzards or sirens or frozen panic. It simply appeared one morning, thin and delicate, like powdered sugar scattered across Red Haven's rooftops. Children noticed first, pressing eager faces to frosty windows. Teachers noticed second, calculating recess delays. And Edmund Dale, as always, noticed from behind the wide, foggy windshield of Bus 6A. He let the heater hum and watched the sidewalk. The girl with the brown curls, Sophie, climbed aboard again, offering him a small wave before sliding into her usual seat. They were halfway through December now. May was gone. Claire was safe. Wexley was waiting behind bars for an indictment. And Agent Lila Devane had returned to Portland with 2 file boxes, 3 audio interviews, 1 sealed container marked recovered evidence, and a vow to come back if the charges stalled in federal court. But for Edmund, the world had already shifted. Not in some loud, cinematic way, but in quieter places. In the way the principal now greeted him with a longer pause, more eye contact. In how Clara kept a reserved drawer at the library labeled ongoing. No one else asked what it meant. And in the way his bus route now included a single, silent promise. I see you. He still walked the length of the bus each evening, flashlight in hand. Still checked each seat. Still crouched low in case something had been left behind. But it wasn't just for misplaced gloves or forgotten math folders anymore. He looked for messages. Signs. Someone hiding. Someone reaching. That Friday evening, as twilight fell and snow thickened beneath the street lamps, he sat in the quiet depot and finished the last item in the lost and found basket. A navy blue hoodie. Thin. Faded at the seams. Inside the front pocket was a crumpled page. Torn at the corner. Smudged with something faintly red. Ink or rust or something older. He smoothed it out gently on the table. She's not the only one. No name. No date. Just those 5 words. And that was all it took. By Saturday morning, Edmund was back on the phone with Agent Devane. He read her the message. She didn't respond immediately. But when she did, her voice was calm and focused. We're just getting started, aren't we? Yes, Edmund said softly. We are. She promised to follow up. And Edmund, he believed her. Because when you finally opened one red door, you started noticing others. Not always locked. Not always basements. Sometimes they were classrooms or apartment hallways or just quiet corners of playgrounds where eyes stayed down and shoulders stayed tight. He'd seen too many kids carry secrets in silence. Not anymore. As Sunday came and snow covered Red Haven in perfect white silence, Edmund opened his cabin window just enough to let the cold in. He sat by the fire, the photo of Claire now tucked into the corner of the mirror. He still didn't know where May had been placed. He hoped it was somewhere with light and warmth and a closet for her own coat. In the quiet, he poured tea and watched the flames. And when the crow returned to his porch railing, silent and still as winter, Edmund nodded to it like an old acquaintance. He understood now. You don't need feathers to be a watchman. You just need eyes that stay open. And so, the old yellow school bus rolls on, through falling snow, through empty streets, through the quiet edges of a town that finally began to notice what it once ignored. Not with headlines or parades, but with watchful eyes, with small kindnesses, with someone finally asking, "Are you all right?" and staying for the answer. Edmund Dale never asked to be a hero. He never wore a badge. He never raised his voice. But in a world full of red doors no one wants to open, sometimes all it takes is a man who listens, who reads between the lines, who sees the children others don't. And maybe, just maybe, that's what saves them. So as the lights go out tonight, and the frost settles on windows like fingerprints left behind, remember, there are still red doors. But there are also people like Edmund, still watching, still listening, still there. Good night, and stay safe.